All right. Thank you so much, Zane. I appreciate the introduction, and thank you to everyone who is joining us today. We really do appreciate it. Um, and are excited to talk to you today about generative board work and really engaging and using your board as much as possible. Um, and to tell you a little bit of what to expect today, we are going to introduce you to a concept of three modes of governance or three um, ways that boards do their work and really do a deeper dive into generative work and generative conversations, as that tends to be the lesser known of those three modes that we're going to talk about. Before we do that, though, and before we dive into our conversation, we'd like to know a little bit about your experience with boards of directors. If you are a staff of an organization with a board of directors, if you've been a board member, maybe both, or if you haven't done either or experienced either and are just happy to be here. So that you should see that poll on your screen to share with us your experience and no wrong answers. We just want to get a feel for who our audience is today. Um, and generative conversations can be a tool that boards and organizations can use to help support and improve board engagement, and also is a really great tool for organizational success by really taking advantage of board of directors and the knowledge base that they have. And again, we'll tell you a little bit more about that. It looks like responses have slowed in the poll. We'll leave that open for just another minute while Howard and I take a quick minute to introduce ourselves. Howard and I work together a lot at CEI and um, have really enjoyed that experience. If we haven't met, I'm Carri Wead. Um, Formerly Carrie McMahon. So same person, different name. And I've been at CEI for almost 9 years now. And my area of work is around board development and organizational development. So I work with a lot of nonprofit organizations and local governments to help them define what better looks like for them and also use ways and identify ways for them to get to what better means to them and make progress. Howard, I would love it if you would introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning. I'm Howard Keim. I live in Heston, Kansas, which is home of the Slothers. I think that is the only mascot in Kansas that's named in honor of a piece of farm equipment. I've worked with the Community Engagement Institute in leadership and coaching since 2016, and I'm thrilled to be able to work with all of the diverse folks there. CEI works to support organizations in a variety of ways that include strengthening the boards of nonprofit organizations. There are many of these organizations in the greater Wichita area, and this webinar is one way to come alongside to support the work that you're doing to make this world a better place. One of
Thanks,
the
Howard.
things that we're also interested in, and I see all of the results of our poll, it looks like most of you are part of a staff with an organization, and also most of you have been a board member. Some of you would say that you're neither of those, but you're happy to be here. And all of you are welcome, and we hope you find this useful. Uh, what words or phrases would you use to describe a typical board meeting that you've been part of? We'd like to hear some responses. You are welcome to unmute and say these words or phrases out loud, or you're welcome to enter them into the chat. And we'll just take note of the different kinds of experiences that we bring with us today. Oh, we have some
Absolutely love your
interest.
response, Colleen. Herding
Yeah,
cats.
yeah.
Mhm,
Easily distractible. Some of these sound like we're not quite sure where we're going, always.
mhm. I also saw rubber stamping in the chat,
Yeah,
random discussions, um, wanting to roll with no actual investment. Oh, Kat, you're speaking to our hearts there. And
yeah.
that's definitely something we're going to talk about. Collaborations of diverse minds. Thanks,
I
Jen.
like that one. Mhm.
Hmm. Yeah, leadership struggles to delegate groups to
Uh,
do different tasks.
This one,
Ineffective.
ineffective and repetitive, we
Mhm.
unfortunately hear that too often. Fiduciary duty, yes, that is
Gentry's.
that will be one of our topics today as well.
Yeah, Gentry's giving us a great segue there. Feel
Yeah,
free to
thank
keep
you.
answering.
Yeah,
Howard, I just wanted to check in. Are your remote controls working?
no,
Okay. All right. So bear with us. Howard's going to have to nudge me to move slides if I miss it. So,
sure. Well, the work of the board is sometimes unclear, which can lead to some frustration on the part of board members as well as senior level staff that work with the board. And we've found the framework of governance as leadership by Richard Chait and Associates in the early 2000s to be really helpful in this work as we come alongside boards. The citation for the book is on the slide down in the right-hand corner. And there are also quite a number of articles that you can access through organizations like BoardSource or others that publish in the area of nonprofit board work that can give fairly concise summaries of the theory and the process. But the big takeaway from the work that we try to do here is that we want to use the expertise of the board to dig into critical issues that the organization faces. We want to utilize the knowledge and experience and gifts of the board to really engage in this process. We often find that board members would like to contribute more to their organizations than just reading reports or approving plans. They want to engage with what we call generative work that deals with the big questions around identity of the organization and the long-term direction of the organization. And this framework does help with that. It gives boards an approach to use in making the most of the knowledge and experience of board members. So some of the outcomes of this kind of framework are that board members come from a variety of places and experiences, and they bring that experience with them. Some have served on multiple boards, some are new to board work, some are there because they are persuaded to come to on the board, and some because this work is their passion. And that creates that difference, that diversity creates a need for a common set of concepts and a vocabulary so that we can at least share the same kinds of concepts when we're doing our work together. We also need time and space to fully utilize this knowledge of the board members. And these three areas of board work that we're going to describe are different modes that appeal to people with different kinds of knowledge and experience. Also, when I began this work several years ago, the CEO of a statewide nonprofit told me that what she really needed in her board was thought partnership. She wanted people to help her think through things. She could do the administrative work without them, but she yearned for a place of thinking together, and she wanted the board to become that kind of a place. And these outcomes lead to board work being more interactive, more interesting, and even more fun. And we typically see the energy in the room go up when people are fully engaged in the questions that really matter to the long-term health of the organization. So to lay a foundation for the framework, we'll start with the three modes of board work. It's kind of like a three-legged stool. Uh, they they depend on one another for balance. And if we have a balance of those three stools, then or three legs, then we don't fall over. But if one of them is in failure mode, then we do often fall over. It balances our weight, it's sturdy, and it provides a strong foundation for our work. These three areas of fiduciary and strategic and generative. A mode is an approach or a way of working. So each of these three, whether they're fiduciary or strategic or generative, is a way of working. And they're all of equal importance. So we'll define them, and then we'll take a look at a deeper look at the generative mode. So first of all, fiduciary. Fiduciary is how we manage the tangible assets of the organization. So in this mode, we make sure we're managing our money well, we're complying with requirements and meeting ethical standards. It includes our policies and standards as well as our money. For example, following our policies and procedures in choosing and reviewing board members is fiduciary work. It's part of our fiduciary responsibility. Sometimes we can assign some of that work to standing committees, but we need to remember also that the responsibility remains with the board as a whole for the fiduciary work. And the work is important because when we're successful, we've got a clean, well-run organization. People know what's expected. They abide by the standards. Our financials are transparent and in good order. Our audits are clean. We don't have conflicts of interest in making decisions. And the problem is that when we fail here, we open ourselves up to financial mismanagement, and we open ourselves up also to ethical lapses sometimes that can endanger the entire organization. So when we see, when we read accounts of scandals in organizations, typically it's the fiduciary responsibility that's highlighted. We don't usually get lawsuits for bad strategic decisions or bad generative discussions, but we do get lawsuits if we really fall down in the fiduciary area. It's very important in terms of running a strong organization. The second area is that of the strategic mode. And this is the area in which we use our resources to implement strategies to meet our goals. So here our work is choosing priorities. What's really important to us now? We make decisions about where we're going to allocate our money, where we're going to allocate our time and our personnel in order to make progress. So if we're successful here, there's a sense of forward movement. We're doing something that we believe in, and we're making progress in it. We're getting somewhere. We can see how we're making a difference for the people we serve. And if we fall short, well, we kind of feel stalled. We might feel like we're spinning our wheels. There's some of you were expressing some of these kinds of frustrations in the chat. We might just put the strategic plan on the shelf till our next retreat, and then just listen to financial and activity reports. And sometimes that seems to be a fallback position for some boards. Generative is the third mode of board work. And this mode is an attempt to engage us with our purpose and our long-term direction. We're not trying here to solve problems. We do that in fiduciary and strategic modes. Here, we're defining what the problems are and how to make sense of what's going on in our environment. This is where we test our interpretations of data. We might name competing values. We might renew our purpose. It is here that we often have disagreements. This is where the heat might rise in a room, and we see disagreements as a good thing because we call those alternative interpretations, different ways of seeing things, and it's important that we get those on the table in this mode, because this mode then informs the strategic mode. If we're clear on our situation and our purpose, then the priorities also become fairly clear. So success here sustains our energy and it positions us for longer term sustainability. And failure here leads to kind of getting overtaken by outside forces that we haven't been paying attention to and becoming slow to react and maybe even irrelevant as an organization. And again, here we can use outside assistance to facilitate our work in any of the three modes. But we need to remember that we should never outsource our responsibility in any of these three areas. The work of the organization in these three areas belongs to us. No matter how good a consultant is, the work is still our work as board members and senior level staff. So to review, here are two examples, or here are some examples of work topics in each mode. These examples are not exhaustive, but they give an idea of what topics lend themselves to different modes of work, and you can see those on the screen. And to clarify these even further, Carri has a short quiz to help us with that.
Quiz sounds so scary. So we do want to, though, to give you the chance to practice with these concepts and help get a better understanding by playing with them. So these are some questions that boards often are working to answer. If you either use your phone to scan the QR code or you follow the link that I dropped into chat, it will take you to a survey that looks at or has these questions, and you just drag and drop the questions into the mode of work they're in. And I'm going to back up so that you can see those summaries again. So this is an open book quiz. And so again, we just want to give you the chance to understand a little bit deeper what these different modes look like in board work. So we'll give you a little bit of time to do that exercise if you would like. And then we'll take a look at the responses and the categories for each of these questions. Right. We're not going to stay on this for too terribly long. We'll give about another minute for folks to answer if they'd like, and then we will continue our conversation. Right. Let's go ahead and break the silence and take a look at those questions and where they belong. So the questions around the audit and what we learned from the audit or what it tells us, questions about personnel policies and whether they align with our mission and values, um, and ethical questions. Those are all fiduciary. Um, and so they are looking um, at those meeting the minimum requirements, making sure you've dotted your T's and crossed your I's. The questions around changing where we are now are strategic. So, what are our priorities? What's the value for our clients? How will this enhance our market position? Those questions are strategic about making progress in the areas that are important and understanding what is important. Generative conversations are how might these coming demographic changes affect our services? What might we learn from our recent success or failure? How is our mission evolving? And as Howard touched on earlier, I think the important thing to note here is that those are all questions that don't have a clear answer, and they're not really solving a problem. They're exploring and investigating the impacts of changes and and the impact of the work that you're doing, but they're not seeking to answer or solve the problem immediately, and they're not making change. They're just questions to understand. So, a couple of additional notes on those three modes of leadership work. Generative work tends to be the least understood and least practiced by nonprofit boards. So, that is the one that is mostly seen in really, really high performing boards or boards that are very intentional about their work and their time together. Leaders of organizations, be they staff or board members, they can improve their effectiveness by engaging in all three types of work. So, um, all pieces and all modes are necessary in order for a board to be successful in their work and for the organization to be successful. Um, so, fiduciary, just because it might be more focused on doing the things that we have to do, does not mean that it's not valuable and important. You can have all the generative conversations in the world, and if you're um, not minding ethics and addressing conflict of interest or submitting your nonprofit reports to the IRS, you are not going to be successful in the long term. Each type of work requires an important and different skill set. And that means that board members individually are going to be attracted to different pieces or modes of work. Um, People who are really analytical minded are going to be more drawn to that fiduciary mode, whereas people who are, more action oriented are going to be drawn to strategic work. Um, and each of these modes integrates with each other, and that's why it's so important to engage in all three types. They all inform each other um, in order to make a whole, complete, successful organization and board. So, what percentage of your board time is invested in each mode? And this is a poll that will have you answer. So, for fiduciary work, what percentage of in your experience, your board time is invested in fiduciary work? Same question for strategic work and generative work. And it's okay if your answers equal more or less than 100%. We're not doing math today. give you a little bit of time to keep answering that question. And I'm going to, while you're thinking about that and while we're on that as a subject, one of the notes that we had was generative work is the least utilized by boards. It's the mode that they function in the least. What makes it so hard to engage in generative work? And you can answer in the chat, or if you would like to, we'd love to hear your voice if we've got a couple of folks who want to answer out loud. I'm going to go ahead and end that poll so that we can see the results and hear your answers. Go ahead, please.
This is Colleen and our board, we have a hard time getting our board to initiate that generative work.
Mm-hmm.
They're more likely to rubber stamp or just wait for somebody else, wait for either me as co-director or my co-director Melissa to start that conversation. And then it's I think they're all engaged in their own thing, and then bringing it together for our work is sometimes hard to process, I think.
Sure. Seeing some feedback in the
Some of
chat.
the comments in the chat indicate that it's also kind of difficult sometimes to get people on the same page, and that can make that kind of work difficult.
I also saw like collaboration, it takes time. And Susie, I see your question, and we actually are going, my short answer is yes. I'm sorry, the question was, does it need to be on the agenda so there's time to dedicate it to it? And so, yeah, my short answer is yes, and we'll talk about that more here in a minute. And folks who have seen it all and claim to know it won't work, it makes it high-level thinking hard. Right, it does, and people at the table constantly shooting ideas down. So it makes it really hard to have a conversation when you feel like everybody's going to shoot you down or be negative about it. Yeah. Time limit. They're focused on future, a brief brainstorm. Then that's about the limit of their conversations. Conflict of interest, disengagement in their opinion and strategy approach. Yeah. The thing that I'm pulling out from a lot of these comments is the need for there to be a solid relationship and trust among board members to have these conversations and share their ideas without that fear of being shot down or other negative reactions. So all of those are right answers and valid answers. There are a lot of things that make it hard. A couple of things that I would add is sometimes boards maybe don't see it as their place or their role. They're relying on the staff of the organization to give them the information so that and the right answers, the quote unquote right answers, versus really digging into those conversations and understanding the challenges. So, what does generative work look like? It is, in short, messy, especially when you're getting started. If you are familiar with the KLC, Kansas Leadership Center framework, generative work would be considered adaptive versus technical. So it is ambiguous, and there are a ton of different ways that you can look at an issue, and so different interpretations of what that is. Um, it also looks like curiosity, wanting to understand and asking questions to understand the opportunities and the challenges that the organization that they're serving is facing, so that they have all of the information they need in order to be productive in their conversations. Um, Another way that I like to think of board or of generative work is and what it looks like is impolite conversations, which if you've worked with our colleague Seth Bate, he uses that term a lot. And so the impolite conversations are conversations where we're talking about something that's uncomfortable. It might feel like stepping on toes or defying traditions, but you talk about it anyway because you need to talk about it, even though it feels risky, even though it feels uncomfortable. It's a needed conversation. Um, and so I think a lot of conversations in the generative mode feel like that. They feel like impolite conversations. Um, it's more, like we said, it's ambiguous, and it really looks and is centered around understanding and um, understanding issues and not necessarily getting to solutions. Solutions are strategic. This is about building that foundation of understanding to make those strategic decisions. It's also important, and I want to touch on what generative work isn't. Generative work is not meddling and the board getting involved in the day-to-day operations and operational challenges of the organization. So that those things are still and should be the work of the staff of the organization if there is one. Um, so this is more big picture and understanding the environment as a whole versus trying to involve themselves into the day-to-day operations of the organization. So that's something to be aware of. And it's also a risk that can come with having these conversations, because operations and those challenges are much more comfortable to have, and they're much easier to understand and to solve. So sometimes boards will kind of default into talking about an application process that the organization is using versus that bigger picture. Um, a few of the benefits of generative work. Um, it- uh, and so there's clear identity. The board feels useful, and they feel like they really are a part of the organization. They're not coming in and listening to report outs for an hour and then approving them and leaving and patting themselves on the back for spending their hour and giving their hour. This is meaningful contribution to the organization. And that meaningful contribution leads to increased board engagement. Board members feel useful, so they want to do the work. It makes strategic work much easier and also more effective because you better understand, again, those external factors, the challenges and opportunities, so that your strategic decisions have a really solid, informed foundation. Um, and all of those things together lead to greater organizational stability because, again, we're making informed decisions and we're acting on information that everybody has discussed and understands. Howard and I would like to share a couple of examples of um, of the impact this has on organizations in the field or in the real world. So, Howard, will you tell us about our first example?
Right. This organization was a comprehensive retirement center, and it was in a healthy place in terms of its financial indicators and quality standards. Um, and with quite a bit of consolidation happening in that industry, there was an opportunity to take on the management of another organization. And there was some momentum to do this among some board members and some momentum among senior administrators. And there was also some real hesitation on the part of some board members, as well as some hesitation among some of the staff members. And so over the course of several months, the board engaged in 3 generative discussions where they reviewed their history and mission, as well as the current business environment for retirement centers. And that review yielded information that helped the board and the administration together to develop some criteria by which they would evaluate considering mergers and acquisitions, so that they then had a framework by which they would judge whether to move ahead or even to consider another kind of expansion opportunity. So in light of all that, it really became quite clear in terms of the immediate opportunity. The board decided to decline that opportunity, and they're now in a position to efficiently evaluate future opportunities. They did recommit themselves to future growth, but now they have a clearer idea about how to go about that growth and what kinds of opportunities um, can profitably be brought into this organization. So in this case, the generative work moved from should we or shouldn't we to under what conditions should we? And clarity around that generative question led to clarity around the strategic question. So the generative work informed the strategic work.
Yeah, and I put in the chat, this is a really good example of another benefit and use of generative conversations and generative board work is that because the board members who are making these decisions have an expanded understanding of the organization and where they're headed because they're doing that generative and strategic work, that can serve as a filter for decision making and deciding whether something is a right fit. Uh, I've seen a lot of nonprofits who are inclined to seize every opportunity that comes their way because it's something that they didn't have before, and there's a lot of scarcity in a lot of nonprofits. So someone's offering us a space, somebody's offering us used books. Well, if you don't work in used books, that's not a good use of those. And that's a very minor example, but it's a really good filter having that organizational understanding and identity to make decisions about whether an opportunity is a good fit rather than accepting all and then working with that. Our other example is a nonprofit organization that it's a small but growing organization, and they had created a strategic plan, but it didn't really give them what they thought it would or help them make the progress that they'd hoped to. So we worked with them for about a year, digging into generative conversations and helping them learn and understand how to have those conversations, which which in turn clarified what their priorities were. And then we worked to revamp their strategic plan. So now they have a strategic plan that they're excited about. It covers more ground, um, and it is broader than it had been. And they've got plans on how to implement their plan. So they're planning to work their plan and have their board members feel more energized and engaged. because now they have a purpose. They're coming to the meetings to talk about important issues, and they're talking about, their progress in their plan. So their strategic conversations, or I'm sorry, their generative conversations let them create a more effective strategic plan that more people can touch on. So what are the things that you need to be productive in generative work? We've talked about this to some degree as far as that trust and good relationships, because you have to be comfortable and confident that you can, I apologize, hitting the wrong button, confident that you can share your ideas and not feel threatened when you do that. So there's some open-mindedness that's necessary. A common base of knowledge. We have seen the most success when we start this work off with executive directors or CEOs giving a state of the organization. So sharing information about the work and the impact of the work, sharing information about local efforts that align with your mission, what organizations are doing similar work. So then you can kind of figure out where you fit in with the greater efforts in your community. You have to have that willingness to experiment. And that's difficult because experimentation comes with a risk of failure. So you have to get comfortable with knowing that not everything is going to work, and that you need those conversations, so you need those experiments for more information. Time. These conversations take time. You can't have a good conversation and do your other board work if you are limited to an hour, especially if you're limited to an hour every quarter. So you've got to be willing to give more time, especially when you're getting started in this work. And that's another important note about generative work, is that it gets easier. Like anything new, it's a new concept and you're learning how to navigate it and how to navigate it with a group of other people. So you've got to be willing to set aside time to have these conversations and be intentional with them. And then engagement of head and heart, which is going back to relationships and that shared desire that all board members should have, that they want the best for the organization and now can see a place for how they can have a really significant impact in that work and in that progress of the organization. And, as a leader of an organization, there are things that you need to be prepared to bring. So you need to, as a leader, and that can be as a board leader, like a board president or leader of the organization, grounding in the situation of the organization. So that's sharing that information, like the state of the organization. So people know coming into this what is going on, and there's some level setting. Thinking across sectors, thinking about what the work that others are doing and the impact, good or bad, that it has on you and how you can fit into that larger realm of the work you're doing. Being courageous to raise new interpretations, especially if you're not familiar and comfortable working with a board. Boards can be really intimidating just as a concept. They feel like this big, hairy, abstract thing. And so raising new interpretations or ideas and disagreeing with them can be really scary. So along with that comes needing to view board members as your thought partners. They are the people who are going to and can help you with understanding issues and coming up with new ideas or concepts for how to evaluate and address those. Getting started in generative board work, we recommend 3 things that seem very small and basic, but require a lot initially. So first is assessing the organization. And this is kind of repeating that, understanding the state of the organization and where you are right now, where you want to go, what the opportunities are, what are the factors that you need to know. A commitment to partnership where board members and senior staff are working together and thinking together. And then also creating blocks of time and open space for generative work. So really being intentional. Somebody asked earlier about whether this is an agenda item or should be. And yes, it absolutely is. Because if you don't create the space for it, you're not going to have the time for it. You're not going to, if it's not on the agenda, then it's not. And then it's not going to get done. It's really easy to put it off, especially when it's new and you're not thinking about it yet. And so there are a lot of ways to approach that. My personal favorite is to once a quarter commit to a longer board meeting that's more dedicated to generative conversations. This does not have to be every meeting and every conversation that you have. There's other important work that needs done. And again, you need all three modes and you need space for all three modes of work. But it's more about building the space for generative work, which does take more time because of the discussion that is involved. If you think about strategic planning is usually a multi-day, multi-hour process. And generative work is along that same vein. It's going to take a time commitment to be successful. But it doesn't have to be all of your time, and it shouldn't be all of your time as a board. And I want to re-emphasize that this can feel kind of gnarly and overwhelming to take on. And once you get into the habit of having generative conversations and you get used to making space for it, generative conversations really become a part of the culture of an organization, and it becomes one of the ways that the board operates. So it doesn't feel like it's a big, massive undertaking. Once you learn it and implement it, it's just a part of how a board operates. And they regularly, a couple times a year or once a quarter, set aside time to have these conversations and have generative check-ins, if you will. What's new and happening? So while it is a lot to do to get started, there's a lot of investment to get started. Once you make that investment, it becomes much easier to do. What questions do you have about generative conversations and getting started having them within your organization?
I think here you're welcome to either put them in the chat or unmute and ask your question orally. We'll try to respond.
Howard will have all of the answers.
Right. Or I might be in generative mode and ask more questions.
That's what I was just thinking. You read my mind. We spend too much time together, Howard.
Carrie, one of the
Yeah.
units that I've worked with, they used book reading. And so they were reading each of them were reading a book, and they took about 10 minutes at the beginning of each board meeting to just talk about what where they are in the book, what they've learned, what they read, how it applies to them. And I thought it was a really creative way not to take up too much time in the board meetings, but also to really learn and apply it to their organization. It led to some great conversations.
Great. Thank you for
Great.
sharing that. That's a great approach. And kind of book club feels familiar, which can make it more comfortable to get started. Other questions or other examples of innovative approaches that boards have taken? Yes. That's a great point, Gentry. Thank you. Gentry said, I think you can prime a board for generative work in board meetings by being intentional with the relationships you build and questions you ask of them outside of the meetings. Carol asked
We
if a
often
board.
find it is useful in preparation for generative work to have some pre-work ahead of time.
Mhm.
And that might be reading an article. It might be reviewing last year's annual report. It might be thinking through a series of questions, kind of appreciative inquiry type questions. Any of those things are helpful, but it often does help the generative work if the board members have done a bit of pre-work in common prior to coming to the meeting.
And that leads to my answer for Carol's question. Can a board create subgroups for generative work? And I would advise a board to have these conversations as a whole to get all of the perspectives, but having somebody or a group that is responsible for championing generative conversations and for planning what those conversations are going to look like is going to be necessary. So it would not be productive to walk into a meeting and say, we're having a generative conversation, let's go. So somebody to really help with the framing and any materials that are needed would absolutely support the work and make it more effective.
Right. And
Thank-
the conversations need to be, as Carrie said, framed so that we have an idea of what it is we're trying to learn. What are the big questions we need to address? And so that it has a direction. I agree with Carrie that coming into a meeting and saying, well, we're going to do generative work, what do you want to discuss? That is a way to kill it pretty quickly and make it less productive. But preparation ahead of time really does help.
Mhm. Absolutely. All right. Well, I know we're just about out of time. So thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate that you were able to create the space to join us and learn more.